Welcome everyone to today's webinar, How Mid-Market Companies Can Emerge Stronger Post-Pandemic. We're going to give everyone a chance to log on, but in the meantime, we're going to go ahead and launch a poll for you. So you'll see this on the screen, and just fill this out while we're waiting. When other people get on, we'll continue. So you should see that on your screen. Go ahead and fill that out as we're waiting for people to log on. So we're going to touch on each of these things today. Customer experience, supply chain, employee engagement, and strategy. So which one of these are you facing the biggest challenge with today? I see a lot of people have already filled it out. We're going to give people just one more second as they're logging on. All right. We're going to do some introductions and let this poll go on for while people log on. Again, thank you everyone for logging on today. I know that everyone is probably ready to move on from COVID-19 and what's going on, and the future will look a lot different than it did in the past. So we're going to talk about how you can emerge stronger post-pandemic. I'm going to close the poll and share the results really quickly with everyone so we can see where we stand today. So it looks like it's a little bit of a tie almost between customer experience and business strategy. So good information to have. This will certainly help our speakers today. We're going to close this. 1 second here. Oops. Bear with me while I hide that so we can get you back on screen here. Here we go. All right, I am Amanda Cook, and I'm the Marketing Director for And Marketing, and I'll be your host for today. Just a little bit of housekeeping before we get started. Everyone is muted so that we can hear the presenters clearly. If you do want to call in using your phone, just go to your audio panel and click that phone button, and you can see the dial-in information. I do want to mention that this presentation is in the chat box. So if you want to follow along with the presentation, you can download that from the chat box and follow along on your computer or just look at it on screen. We will be taking questions throughout this presentation. So that's the one thing I do want to make sure that we talk about early on, is that we will take those questions throughout. I will pose them to these speakers as appropriate, and then obviously take any questions at the end. So feel free to put them in that questions box, and we'll get to those as they come in. So with that, I'm going to introduce our subject matter experts today. First, we have Robert Olson. He is a marketing expert, speaker, and consultant with a unique combination of management consulting and C-suite experience in chemicals and life sciences. He is an experienced CMO and has served as corporate marketing director at DuPont and strategy and operations consultant for Deloitte. Bob helps companies grow by helping them navigate major changes and new programs, including M&A, brand building, and culture transformations. We also have Rahul Kapoor. He has over 40 years of successful business experience spanning a variety of industries. He's served as the Chief Strategy Officer for both Aero Technology, which is now 3M, and Dow Brands, which is a division of Dow Chemical. As a business consultant, he helps companies of all sizes with strategy development, M&A, new products, and innovation in data analysis and modeling. And finally, we will hear from Rajat Kapoor, who is the founder and managing director of And Marketing. Raj strives to provide growing businesses of all sizes unparalleled marketing strategy and execution services. He brings nearly 2 decades of experience in marketing, sales, strategy development, and spans both B2B and B2C Fortune 500, Fortune 50 midsize and startups. So thank you to our subject matter experts who are with us today. So we're going to talk about a few key business discontinuities and changes that have come out of COVID-19 and how mid-market companies can harness them. As I said, we're going to touch on 4 areas, which include customer experience, relationships with employees, supply chain, and strategy. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Bob to get started.
All right, thanks, Amanda. Good morning or good afternoon to everyone, depending on where you are. I'm going to touch on some of the trends that we see emerging out of the first several months of the pandemic and what's likely to continue. We've got behaviors and attitudes that are running so deep and with a strong level of uncertainty that we feel companies really need to dig deep on refreshing and re-examining pieces of their businesses. So there's key trends taking place that are social, that are economic, that are health, that are a convergence of these things as we've never seen before. We were all familiar with the term unprecedented, but that's truly the case. Any one of these we may have seen before in a business environment, but all 3 of these at once certainly is a crazy storm. I won't call it the perfect storm. So for many, we're never going to go back to the way things were, and the changes will reverberate for the rest of the decade. But smart and agile companies can emerge even stronger and more competitive by identifying the right opportunities. And just it's worth a call out, some of the companies that you all know were born out of crisis in the past: Netflix, WhatsApp, Venmo, Uber, Airbnb, Purple Carrot, all companies that came out of some type of economic crisis. And so I would encourage you all to continue to dig and look for the opportunities as we examine these trends. So what I'm going to highlight just on, as you see before you on this slide, a couple of things that are the underpinning of some of the work to follow. So some of the trends we're seeing, of course, consumers are going to have a stronger, long-lasting focus on health. Not only might they be willing to pay more, but I think they're going to expect it and put their trust in the companies, both as an employee and as a customer. They're going to look to companies to take care of them, and they're going to pay more for the services that come with that. Consumers are spending more time at home. Work from home is here to stay. Employees have adapted to this. Companies realize not only is it possible to work from home, but in some cases it's more cost effective. So we're going to see, and we're seeing a move, and we'll never return to the levels of work from home that we are. We've broken through sort of a barrier on that. Digital is of course going to continue to accelerate with a focus on selling and servicing. So companies that can seamlessly sell, service, and engage with not just customers, but with employees online are going to be the winners. So in companies that aren't really embracing this and haven't or are behind in their digital strategies are really going to get left behind. And sadly, a lot of companies have gone and will continue to go out of business, especially small companies. Large numbers of companies. Bloomberg estimates about 80,000 companies between March and the end of July have gone permanently out of business. And while this is sad, it's an opportunity for those that remain to rethink some strategies. Do these partnerships, are there opportunities for partnerships to gain share, to gain services, to gain capabilities? So Raul will talk a little bit more about that under strategy. And certainly supply chains are getting disrupted left and right, especially with things coming in from Asia, and even when materials arrive to the States. We've lacked some of the labor pools at the ports to bring them in. I finally got my bike rack yesterday, which was on order for 8 weeks. So we're starting to see some changes in that, but it's going to be key for companies to build resilient supply chains going forward. So those are some of the major things that we think are taking place. I'm sure there's specifics in each of our industries, but these are getting some thoughts stirred for the next part of the discussion. Next slide, please, Amanda. So we think and firmly believe that there's 4 key areas that a company needs to address to build resiliency and adaptability, not just to survive, but to thrive and look for opportunities in the pandemic and hopefully coming out of it over the months ahead. We'll dig deep on each of these, and these are coincide very well with the first one with the survey we just did. So we're finding the customer experience, how have our customers' behaviors have changed, and also do we have the ongoing capabilities to really understand our customers and build voice of the customer capabilities. Relationships with our employees, just as important as the customer. It's hard to have excellent customer satisfaction without excellent employee satisfaction. Restructuring the supply chain, and we saw the need to create agile supply chains and take actions now to mitigate continued changes. And certainly rethinking business strategy, another one that came out high in the survey we saw a moment ago. Is it time to reset, re-examine your strategy? We believe so. Really understand what changes have taken place in the marketplace with your customers, and be very deliberate about how you look at the strategy and make sure then you have the organization in place that stands behind that adopted strategy. So those are the 4 areas we think are critical to a business to examine, and we're going to take you through a little bit on each one of these.
Thanks, Bob. I want to congratulate you on getting your first question. So get those questions in, people. These 4 areas seem to cross a lot of different layers and functions within our company. So who should be a part of these conversations?
Yeah, the short answer is everyone. I think in two groups. I think leadership needs to own this. So whether it's the C-suite or the leadership team of a company, starting with the president or the CEO, really needs to own the look and the process going through all of these areas. And then certainly the functional leadership needs to own this, and it needs to cross functional boundaries. It can't just be HR, for example, owning the relationship with employees. It needs to be all the functional leaders, whether it's sales, marketing, operations. So the leadership team really needs to own all of these. But it doesnn't stop there. I would recommend that we all engage our employees, whether it's through surveys, one-on-one discussion, town halls, focus groups. That's where the information is going to come from. How are our employees thinking? What are we seeing with the customers? What do we need to do for our supply chains? That's where all the ideas are going to come from. So I would say, reaching across the organization, leadership owns it, but make sure we're getting two-way communication down into the organization at the front lines, who are really seeing what's going on with the company and in the market.
Thank you.
Did I win something for being the first question?
Check is in the mail.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so Bob, it's interesting that the question was related to who in the organization sort of owns it, because as we start to talk about customer impacts and customer experience, I think back to the debate that we had. So just for information on the people on the webinar, this webinar is based on a series of articles that we published on our website, really digging deeper into each of those issues. And as we were talking about the customer piece specifically, there was a little bit of a conversation between, is this something that marketing is supposed to own? Is this something that sales is supposed to own? And that's really not the point. The point is that the customer experience is changing in major ways as a result of COVID-19 and all of the ongoing effects that we're experiencing. We really think of the customer side of this as being about customer experience. And so sometimes that's a little bit of a throwaway term, but what you should really be thinking about is that your customer experience is what they experience across all touch points when they come into contact with your company or your competitors. So it's everything matters. What is most important to them from, sort of when they first learn that they have a problem, all the way through to purchase and ongoing process. So as we broke down some of those layers, it really does cross multiple functions in an organization. It's certainly marketing, it's certainly sales. Some organizations now have customer experience organizations. It could be called customer service. It's sort of all of those customer facing folks. And so as we look at the real big trends and the things that you might be thinking about as a company, at first it really drives around trust and deepening relationships. One of the old adages about a market disruption is that when you gain share during a disruption, you are much more likely to keep that share after the disruption is over. So we hear a lot of conversations about reducing spend on marketing, reducing spend on sales. This is actually the wrong time to do that. And certainly I run a marketing company, so it's very easy for me to say that, but the proof is really in the pudding. Bob rattled off half a dozen companies that actually pivoted their businesses or were created during these pandemics. And it's really built around deepening relationships and deepening trust with their customers. So this is a very personal one-on-one sort of a thing where you can come up with new products, new services, really open your ears. This kind of leads to the second point is many companies often do market research as a one-time activity. But in reality, when things are changing as fast as they are, you have to be able to weave an understanding of what's going on at the customer into the fabric of your business. So it's not just something that the marketing department or the research department does once a year. It's something that you're pulsing on a constant basis to see what's changing. So have your salespeople, have your marketing people constantly pulsing and getting information. The third one is about technology. So Bob mentioned one of the major disruptions is around technology. What I'll say as an owner of a marketing company, I have never seen so many requests for new e-commerce sites, chatbots, websites, and other online types of technology programs that clients need implemented fast. And I think it's a result of a bunch of, new ways of doing things. Trade shows don't exist anymore. Networking events don't work anymore. You don't have your salespeople doing their typical routines of meet with customers and prospects. So these technologies adapt to the fact that everybody, including our customers, are working from home, and fast tracking these technologies allow these better customer interactions. A lot of that requires redefining the sales role. Quite often when we deal with mid-market or larger companies, a lot of the sales teams haven't done different things in a number of years. So really taking this opportunity to redefine what you expect from the sales organization is really paramount. So programs that we've seen get very popular are how to work better on LinkedIn, how to do better email marketing programs, how to do better content strategy. Because again, your customer is at home just like the rest of us. They're spending a lot more time in front of their screens. Are you doing webinars? Are you doing interactive types of things? So really developing what we call these social selling programs. We have a partner of Ann Marketing. Her name is Bryn Tillman. She runs a program called Social Sales Link, a company called Social Sales Link, and they do a fabulous job of training some of these older school sales teams on how to use some of these new tools. So there's a lot of those things out there that might be really good. So Amanda, those are 3 or 4 thoughts that I would have as it comes to redefining the customer experience.
Yeah, we actually have some questions on that. The first one, which you kind of touched on, is that their sales team is used to doing one-on-one meetings or trade shows. How do they adapt now, and what should they do?
Yeah, I think the number one thing that I've seen a gap in is how easy some of these modern tools are to use. So I mentioned LinkedIn and social sales, that kind of a thing. It is probably the easiest thing to allow sales teams to get trained in. LinkedIn has done a fabulous job over the last 3 years since it was acquired by Microsoft to update their tools, create their mechanisms. It used to be just a place where you went if you needed a job and you want to do a job search. Now it has become a real social network. So I'd say the number one thing people can do is train up their sales team on how to use LinkedIn and simple tools like that to really drive value. I would also encourage Bob and Rahul, you guys are in this space as much as I am. Any other things you would recommend that you guys are seeing?
I was thinking of an example of a company I'm working with where they've actually come up with a point system for their salespeople. So every time you make a phone call, every time you do a Zoom meeting, every time you have a conversation with your customers, you get a certain amount of points, and they've set goals. So you want to keep making sure that your customer is contacted on a regular basis. And that's one of the goals they put together. And they track the number of points people got, and they do follow-up on whether they are actually meeting their goals. So I thought that was an interesting way to have your sales force keep in touch with customers.
We also have another question about sales. The relationship between sales and marketing is very siloed at my company. How do you address that? Oh, I think you're muted, Raj.
My apologies. That's the most common new term to hear. You're on mute when you're trying to speak, so my apologies. So we run into this issue all the time. So as a marketing company, quite often we are charged with driving leads to an organization, but obviously revenue does not end once you get the lead. So I would say there's really 2 keys to closing that divide between sales and marketing. The first one is communication, and it's just good old-fashioned lots and lots of communication. So what are you seeing? So the old adage is the salespeople are saying, oh, the marketing folks are too theoretical. They're not providing value. They don't know what the real world looks like. And then the marketing people look at the salespeople and say, they're not using our tools. They're not following up. What are they doing out there in the field? And so if you're communicating, those silos tend to be broken down, and you tend to get a very clear look at what is working, what's not working, what's driving a good lead, what are you seeing in the marketplace, and just allowing those silos to break down. The second one is metrics. So what you measure will get results. If you are measuring the sales and marketing teams on the same things, then all of a sudden they just seem to start coinciding their activity, working better together. So those are the two things that I would say are the easiest to implement, but are the least frequently done well in most of the companies that we talk to.
I'll just add a real life example where I've seen this over and over. You have a lead generation process, but the leads get chucked over to the salespeople, and the salespeople following up. One of the things I've seen that works very well is either a weekly or bi-weekly meeting, once in even 2 weeks, where here are the leads you got, what was the follow-up, what did the customer say? You want to know what the response was when you called them up and followed up on the lead. That can be very revealing.
Awesome. Those are great questions. Please remember to put those in the questions box, and we will continue to get those answered. Let's see. There we go.
All right, I'll pick it up from here. Of course, staying close to the customer is top of mind for good reasons. However, keeping a focus on our employees is just as important. Given the changes that have taken place, the employee mindsets, behaviors, and even some of the values are shifting. And companies are going to struggle to regain, in some cases, the trust, engagement, and productivity of their employees. So I would encourage all of you to take deliberate steps to re-examine things like culture, the organizational structure, and efforts to improve and reduce anxiety and better prepare employees for the changes. But being very deliberate about it, just as you would with the customer. So on the left, you're seeing some of the key trends that we've identified that are heavily impacting employees. I'll touch on a couple of these. Certainly the disenfranchised workforce. And what we mean by that is that many have become unemployed or furloughed, or for the first time in their lives have had their benefits cut or had to take mandatory vacation. That all obviously has a tremendous impact on the relationship with the company. So companies are now faced with rebuilding that trust and loyalty, and maybe in some cases the confidence in the company itself. The distributed workforce, working at home, we touched on that earlier. We've broken through a barrier from working from home, and we're never going back. Companies now know it's not only doable, but it's practical, and in some cases it's a cost-saving mechanism. So these two alone are large changes that are affecting our workforce, and we're never going back. I'm gonna, rather than go to the balance there, I'm gonna share with you a little bit of data here. If it doesn't get your attention on focusing on your employees, I'm not sure what will. So these are things that came from Forrester, Gartner, Gallup, so all very reputable areas. Only 33% of employees, US employees, feel safe and ready to go back to the office once it's declared as safe. 48% of employees will work remotely after the pandemic, which is up 30%, a 30% increase in working from home. The post-pandemic workforce, 32% of organizations will replace full-time employees with contingent or part-time workers. So the gig economy is going to continue to go strong. Work-related concerns have left more than 40% of employees feeling hopeless, burned out, or exhausted as they grapple with what's going on with the COVID environment. And those points are all brand new during the pandemic. This one is an older data set, but I believe it's just increasing with the current environment. That decades of data show that over 2/3 of workers in the US are not engaged in their companies or in their roles. So these, to me, I don't know about you, but these to me are staggering staggering points. So some of the things that we've identified that a company can begin to do about it, you see on the right. Now, as Raj said, we've developed some articles on this, so if you want a further detail, feel free to go check those out. But I'll sort of just group these in the top three and the bottom three. The top three are really the basics, getting the basics right with our employees, making sure they're taken care of. They have programs for wellness. You're communicating well to them. You're hearing that feedback coming back and adjusting. Being willing to, on an ongoing basis, adjust, office schedules, enable, continued enablement of working from home, making sure everyone knows what's available in the EAP programs, and continuing to have executive communication, having your leaders provide them with tools so they can engage their teams and have a two-way communication. So those are really a function of the basics. And during a crisis, our employees want to hear more, not less. And too often, smaller companies struggle with getting this right, but I would encourage you all to take the time to do it. Companies like Pepsi and Microsoft are doing a great job of taking care of their employees, providing those that have tested positive, providing full salaries. For those that have loved ones that they're taking care of, they're providing partial salaries, providing supplemental financial support for daycare. Microsoft has developed a guide for employees to help them work from home and help them think through how to recharge or take care of their mental health, and they've even made that available to their customers in the markets at large. So I would encourage you just to take a moment and step back and make sure you're getting the basics right when it comes to the employees. Now, the last three are a little deeper, right? These are things that make sense to do in all times, but especially now. So things like getting the culture right, right? So when you're re-engaging an employee group, especially those that are at a workforce that is now disconnected and more distributed, getting the culture right is critical. It's one of the most chronically overlooked success levers that a company has. But you can do things to begin to impact the culture, understand where you are today, what the company needs to do going forward, what are the attributes of a good culture that's consistent with your values, and more importantly, your changing strategy, and have leaders model those behaviors. So often I'm asking, is culture something that you can impact, or is it just built from the ground up and it's there? And leadership can definitely impact the culture. Managing your talent strategically. These are, again, back to the basics, but a lot of companies overlook that. Do you have the right people in the right roles? Is there role clarity? Are there training? Are there reskilling efforts? So all those things may change given a reset with your customers, or given a reset with your strategy. And I would encourage you to come back and look at these basics of having a successful organization. Do you have the right leaders in the right roles? For example, is the question I would ask all of you as you re-examine things like your strategy and what customers you're focusing on and how you're focusing on them. And lastly, boosting employee engagement is critical. That last data point that I mentioned came from Gallup, and I think too often people overlook what an engaged employee really feels. We often think that salary is a big engagement lever, and it's really not. It's things like achievement and recognition, achievement like making a difference, seeing a value in one's work and what they do, and being relevant to the company and having a clear role, and recognition. When others notice and praise and are shown respect, people feel good about their job and get engaged. So it's about showing people that they matter and what they do matters. So these are a few of the things I would encourage you to go back to your organizations and look through and assess what you're doing well and what you're not doing well, keeping the communications flowing well, and making sure that you're managing your talent well in light of the changes that your company may be faced with.
Bob, if I could just jump in here real quick, as you, what was really interesting about what you said is that typically people like us would think this is HR's job. Oh, let's just have HR handle it. But similar to what we said about in customers, it's really not just the sales and marketing departments, it's the whole organization. This is really a leadership challenge, because if you leave this to the HR folks, which are extremely important in HR as a very critical function, but if this is not something you're talking about in every department across the leadership of the organization, it's really going to fall through. I mean, I, as a company leader, have not just seen this at my company, I've seen some of these issues at every single one of our clients over the last 4 months. And so if it's not something that you're talking about a lot, I think it's a real long-term risk to your employee workforce and your culture.
Right. Yeah, it's companies that have done this well have done a couple things that support what you're saying, Raj. You know, using HR sort of to bring in the best practices and help make sure we're doing things right. But using a business champion, a leader of one of the business divisions or an operations leader, someone that normally isn't at the forefront of these things, and being the champion, being the face, being the spokesperson for these kinds of efforts, and then engaging the organization, whether you're doing pulse surveys to really understand what's working well or what's not working well, what they need to hear more of, what they want to hear less of in their communication, focus groups, all those tools that you would use with your customer, I would use with your employees as well. They're the same logic applies to that. Good point.
I just add a quick example where you got to keep in touch with a remote workforce. So people are having calls every week. I've even seen a company that has sent out gifts to everyone at the end of every week or two, just to appreciate the work they're doing remotely. So there is a challenge in keeping a remote workforce motivated.
I'm going to look for that gift on Friday, Raj.
Great point, great point.
We have another question, and Bob, you touched on it a little bit, but one of the things was, how do you assess where your culture is today? Like, what's the method of assessing that?
Yeah, I think a few things. I think one, leadership may or may not know, right, where they feel the culture is today. So one way to do it is, look at Glassdoor. Just kind of go out and look up your company and see what they say. So we all probably think, I think I'm 15 pounds, lighter than I really look, so we all have a false impression of ourselves. So if you go out on a Glassdoor, and some of those may be, oddballs, but if you take out the outliers, it'll give you a good snapshot, at least the starting point. Then I would dig in and I would engage the employees. Again, you've got same tools you use with customers to get voice of the customers. I would do that with the employees to identify what's working well in the culture and what needs to change in the culture, and get them involved, right, in helping to lead the charge. Find the biggest curmudgeons in the company and make them part of the project team. Make them part of the effort to do this. And as Raul pointed out, you've got to reach out to the folks that are working in a distributed fashion as well. And then put the things together that are going to be able to change it to the to-be state. It's the messaging that leaders have. It can go and be embedded into the performance system. It's the way you start a meeting. When I was at DuPont had a culture of safety, as you may know. Every meeting was started with a topic about safety. A tip or an anecdote or something like that, and it begins things like that can change a culture and reinforce it. So there's a lot of things that we can do deliberately, and I can assure you that culture change is something that can be done, and if it's not good, it's going to be one of the biggest impactors of the company.
Bob, just as an example to the point you made of going and talking to employees, I recently saw an interview with the CEO of Delta, and he has been going every week to a different location and spends anywhere between half an hour to an hour just talking to employees in a kind of social focus group setting. And he's been in touch with the employees on a regular basis. They're able to ask him questions, and he hears firsthand what the issues are.
That's an excellent example. And what I see really good leaders doing is letting their guard down a little bit, talking about anxiety, mental health issues, work-life balance issues, and that's been a change. So like typically, the C-suite doesn't talk about those things in these settings, but I've seen the best leaders at the best companies do that. So I want to encourage everyone to really be authentic with your teams and talk about those issues around wellness and health, in addition to the normal state of the business.
All right, let's move on to supply chain.
Okay, I'll take up the supply chain issues, and basically there have been three trends, major trends that we've noted. And the first is that not all suppliers or not all companies are reopening. As of last week, only about half the businesses, a little over half the businesses in the US had reopened. It is expected that as many as 30% of companies may go out of business. Now, it's going to vary across various industries where sports and entertainment and tourism are probably going to be the worst affected. But that is going to be a big issue because when you open, your suppliers may not. The second big issue that has been talked about repeatedly is single sourcing is no longer a solution. So while you may have a strong relationship with a supplier, there is a risk that if it's single source and something happens at that supplier, you're going to have a problem. This is especially has been true in this case of suppliers from China. And everybody knows the issues that were around PPE and medical equipment where everything was stalled for a period of time. The third trend as a result is there's going to be increasing domestic manufacturing, especially of essential supply. You may have governments building up stockpiles. You could have more domestic manufacturing, and you could have more manufacturing out of North America. A lot of companies I know of have been looking at imports from Mexico and Central America rather than from China. I think from all this, we've identified three major steps that you can take immediately. Firstly, you've got to know in detail what items are at risk. So a lot of companies have faced supply issues, and you really got to come down to, in a granular detail, where are the problems. Second, it is probably very good to have a document and a map of your supply chain. So you can put together a document of all your significant suppliers with all the details of where the supplies come from and how they're routed, as well as all the information on this supplier and maybe some of their competitors. The third thing that a number of companies have done immediately is there have been cost savings, particularly, for example, in transportation. We went through a period in May, June, where transportation rates dropped dramatically because things were not being shipped. There are 4 or 5 things that we've identified that you should be looking at in the future. Coming out of the trends and out of the immediate steps, first of all, you've got to diversify sources, at least for critical components and materials. Secondly, you want to build a higher level of safety stock or a strategic inventory reserve, particularly for products that could be a problem in a pandemic type situation. The third one that a lot of companies are looking at is you want to onboard suppliers more quickly. One of the problems that has occurred is if your supplier went out of business and you want to go to another supplier, how do you onboard them? Most companies have pretty elaborate processes to do that, and simplifying these will certainly be to your advantage. Again, we mentioned that you want to level all the government support that is coming through, particularly in certain areas where they may be helping you with stockpiling and or even building capacity. And last but not least is there's a whole set of software that's available out there for managing your supply chain in more detail. Amanda, I think you're on mute.
Yeah, thanks. We do have a question. With the supply chain disruptions that we're having right now, is now a good time to consider acquisitions or any other investments?
I would certainly consider acquisitions of maybe competitors who are having problems and are maybe going out of business, but buying your suppliers may or may not be a good idea. And usually the problems are in 2 areas. One, you don't have the core competencies and the capabilities to really run your suppliers. And secondly, I've found over and over again, when you look at suppliers, even though you may be a major part of their business, let's say even if you're 30, 40, 50% of their business, you still have your competitors buying from them or other companies buying from them who may or may not want to buy from you if you were the owner. So if your competitor also owns your supplier, that leads to problems. So you got to be very careful with this.
Great. Any other questions? I want to make sure to remind people to put those in the questions box as we move through the rest of this presentation. We're going to continue with strategy.
Okay, so if you want to reset your strategy, it may feel like a daunting task, but actually it may not be that difficult. I think the core of most strategy rests on 4 things, which are on the left side of the diagram. It is what's the state of your business post-pandemic? This is margins, this is competitors, what has happened to your business? The second area is what are the trends, and we've talked about several, that impact your business. They may or may not be the same. It could be very different if you're in tourism and very different if you're in the housing market. The housing market, for example, is up 9% because people are upgrading homes. The third thing that I would look at is to do a real, genuine SWOT analysis. Recognize what your strengths are, recognize what your weaknesses are. Out of that may come some opportunities, and you also have to recognize the threats. The final one I found people find it most difficult to do is really to define what is their competitive advantage. I tend to use the route of defining your core competencies, but it really comes down to what do you do that's meaningful to your customers that gives you a competitive advantage. It could be a functionality, it could be excellent customer service, it could be a whole range of things. It could be that you do innovation better than anyone else, et cetera, et cetera. These 4 things form the pillar of what are my opportunities, what opportunities can I go after, and then you prioritize these opportunities. And I don't necessarily only mean growth opportunities, but that could be a major part of it. There could be opportunities for cost management. There could be opportunities for doing acquisitions. And one that I think a number of companies don't go too quickly is opportunities for a partnership. Partnerships can really be important. These could be with your suppliers, universities, and a whole range of outside third parties that could be important. We have some simple ways of doing prioritization, and what we've learned is to get faster impact, go after the opportunities that are easier to get to and give you a medium to high impact. At the same time, all companies will tell you that you want to spend maybe 15 or 20% of your resources on longer term, bigger opportunities. Again, part of that set is what resources will you need to pursue these opportunities? And then in the document that the blog we put out, there is a simple 1-page strategy map. It really takes all this and puts it on 1 page. And I find that is a great communication tool and a great way to make sure that your organization stays on strategy. Any questions, Amanda?
Yeah, we do have a question. It says, our typical strategic planning process is very long, complex, and daunting. So how do you envision this going quicker to address our current needs?
The way we have structured this, and I'm actually working with a couple of companies right now, to do those 4 things can take a little bit of time, but we usually end up being able to do it in anywhere from 4 to 8 weeks. And get to through this whole process, a lot of companies have most of the information already. We can spend a lot of time doing analysis, but I believe in following the 80-20 rule. You get 80% of the impact very quickly, and you can understand what's going on. So a process like this can be very long, but it can also be much shorter and can be done in 4 to 6 weeks. And I would say if you're a business with a number of businesses or strategic units, then I'm talking about each strategic business unit can probably be done anywhere from 4 to 8 weeks.
Yeah, Rahul, let me I have a slightly different answer, same overall point, but I've done this sort of process, and again, when things aren't working well or something is changing in your business, always go back to the fundamentals and question your strategies, question your assumptions, and question all of those things. We did this with 2 different clients and on our own business. And instead of doing this comprehensively step by step, which I certainly advocate, doing a quick version of this by pulsing your customers, understanding what they need, pulsing your employees, and pulsing what is happening out in the macro world. So secondary research, reading a lot of articles, doing a quick, what has changed, how should we react sort of an exercise in rapid succession can drive an incredible amount of ideation. So I'm certainly advocating for the process that you laid out. 4 weeks is not that long a process when in a pandemic that's been going on for 4 months, certainly. I found incredible success when you're having trouble in the marketplace. Go back to these fundamentals, really question, are your strengths your strengths? Are those opportunities your opportunities? How have your threats changed? Because even if you did this a year ago, the pandemic hit, everything changed. It's okay to go back and do these in a different way. So we found some tremendous success doing this sort of like a quicker version of this. And it's interesting that over 50% of the survey respondents said that this was one of their biggest challenges. I think this is because it's uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable for businesses to go back and question their core competencies, question how all these sorts of things are doing. And I think that's why so much innovation happens during these times. So,
Raj,
no, I totally agree with you. I think pulsing your customers, pulsing your suppliers, and fully understanding your environment can be done pretty rapidly through a lot of secondary and internet research. That's perfectly correct.
And make sure to make the link back, structure follows strategy, right? So the things that we covered for employees really need to come back and be revisited once you do this, right? Right people in the right roles, right? Do you have the right leaders with the right skill set if you're making changes to your strategy? Too often, a strategy will fail, but it's not the strategy itself. It's a failure to take the action with the rest of the organization to put the right resources and capabilities in place to deliver on it.
Yeah, let me just build further
in fact,
on that.
I'll give you a very quick example. I'm working with a company that's about $30 million, and I gave this gentleman my thinking, and in about 4 days, he came back with his thoughts on each of those 4 areas. And that's where we are using that. We're using that as a starting point to figure out what he should be doing.
Yeah, Bob, I was going to jump on your comment about strategy and then structure. It's interesting to me that when you have the conversation, people are automatically drawn to the previous way of doing business, and they say, we can't do this thing differently because I don't have a department or a resource or a group to do that. Well, in reality, you should think about what does the market now need, and maybe I need to go take that person, pull them out of their old existing role, find somebody else to fill that responsibility, or maybe not, and invent something new, and that's okay. The couple companies that I mentioned that we did this process with actually created little squad teams that would work on this very specific thing just to get something out of market, because if they had done it in their previously embedded roles, it would take months to launch, when in actuality, you can launch some of these things in weeks. So I think
and you add to that the sort of the flexibility with a contingent workforce as well, right? So if you have those skill sets that you need to connect quickly on a project basis, it's getting easier and easier every day to access those resources, access the talent across geographies. Good point.
Thank you, guys. Through this presentation, we certainly don't want to imply that we are out of this pandemic yet. We are certainly very much in it. But now is the time to really take a moment to think about the metrics and the insights that we talked about today. There is no one size fits all. Your company is unique to you. So it's really important that you take a step back and take a look at all of these 4 areas and personalize and prioritize these recommendations for your business. One of the ways that we recommend that we do that is do a post-pandemic readiness assessment. To the right of this slide, you'll see a spider chart. Some of you may be familiar with it, some of you may not. The white line right here is where you want to be, but after you do this assessment, the orange that you see on your screen is where you are in reality. So it really highlights the areas where you need to focus to get where you want to be. These labels might be different for your company. For example, a SaaS company probably doesn't have a huge interest in supply chain, but they are most definitely interested in customer base and employees and strategy. So, the opposite could be said for a different type of industry or a different type of business. We've actually done this for companies before, and as you can see here, they needed some significant help in their area of customer experience. And so we really helped them build strategy around how to increase their customer experience, their customer base, lead generation, and helping them really drive business for more customers. So we recommend everybody do one of these. We can certainly help you do that. So make sure you contact us if you want us to perform this assessment for you, and we can do that. I want to remind everybody. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Bob.
In addition to providing the tactics and a view of where the gaps are, tools like this are a really good engagement tool for the organization. So we talked about earlier, where does the role reside that does this work? This is a great way to engage the organization, bring them along. It's an excellent change management tool in addition to a strategic tool.
Thank you. I do want to make sure anybody gets their questions answered. So if you haven't put your question in the box yet, please do that now as we wrap up. Please take a moment to leave us some feedback on today's webinar. We do review that. We are happy to provide an individual consultation for anybody who's on here, as well as that post-pandemic readiness assessment session, no strings attached. We're happy to provide the results for that for you. Just reach out to Raj Kapoor or our link there, andmarketing.com/contact. I do not see any more questions, but in the meantime, we do have a webinar coming up in September 10th. It will be how to enhance your website experience to drive business results. As Raj mentioned, we've had a lot of clients really either improve their experience on their website or develop entirely new websites in response to this. So we have outlined 6 points that are really important to your website approach. So make sure you sign up for that. You'll receive a link to register in your post-webinar email as well. And with that, I don't see any other questions. I might have lied. We do have one question, I'm sorry. What's your advice on pricing strategy in this crisis? Anybody?
I'll take a shot. I think it's back to the basics still, Amanda. I think, really understanding your own value proposition, right? Your own value proposition versus the next best alternative. That's where, it comes back to me. Segmenting your customers, understanding the value proposition for that segment. So the dynamics may have changed. They may value what you have less. They may value what you have more. So one needs to understand that. And the next best competitive option may have changed as well. So if you don't have good pricing practices that do that, now's the time to put them in. But I would say refresh it, through some of the pricing basics, like understanding, the value of what you're bringing, quantify that, engage your customer. If you're a B2B company, engage your customer around quantifying what that value is. You may get it right, you may get it wrong, but you'll learn and engage your customer. So I would return to the basics of pricing and make sure the dynamics of the current environment are dialed into that.
I'll just add one thing from the experience I've seen over the last couple of months is most companies have not really taken advantage or undue advantage of the crisis to take prices up. The one biggest difference is, in some cases, raw material prices have gone up significantly, and those need to be passed on. A great example, which we came across in the last week or so, is nitrile gloves. Safety gloves, chemical gloves have gone up. The raw materials have more than doubled. And that's because the demand has gone up from somewhere around 3 billion gloves a year to 4.5 billion, 300 billion gloves a year to 450 billion gloves a year. And there just isn't enough supply of nitrile chemicals. So there you need to communicate very well with your customers as to what is happening in that marketplace and why you're taking your prices up.
Yeah, let me just add to that. And the reason I laughed when you asked the question, I've actually worked on pricing projects with both Bob and Rahul, and I knew that they'd both have strong opinions on the topic, but I agree. So just to provide a real life example, we're doing a pricing project right now where we're bringing a new offer to market for one of our clients, and we're doing a little bit of both of these. So the example is that it's a service, and it's really understanding who is the individual customer segment that has the problem. And if you are doing surveys and you are pulsing and you're understanding the value, then you understand the value versus that next best alternative. And sometimes that next best alternative isn't a real competitor. It's a spreadsheet, it's Google, it's something that is free and used to find that pain point. And so really understanding what are the cost bases for your pricing, which is really important, obviously, but it's really getting the value that you're providing. And it's ignoring people that say, I don't have this problem, I don't really participate in it, and honing in on that customer segment that actually has the problem, figuring out their value equation, and then really building a pricing strategy around that. It's very uncomfortable to work on pricing, but it is really an art, and obviously it's one of the main levers in driving profit for your business. So it's a really great question.
Great, thank you so much, gentlemen. That brings us to the end of questions and the end of our webinar. So thank you so much to our speakers for joining us today. Thank you to all of the participants for taking the time to log on. As I mentioned, please feel free to reach out to us to help you with that post-readiness assessment. We're happy to do that, no strings attached for you. So you can find information on a link to contact us in your follow-up email as well. So thank you, gentlemen. Thank you, everyone, and have a great day.
Thanks, Amanda. Thanks, Bob. Thanks, Rahul.
Thank you.
Thank you.